So, hello, Anthony. Thank you for your book, The Ultimate Unofficial Guide to Tolkien's World. We're doing a little interview here for my patrons. So I'd like to ask you a few questions so they know who you are and perhaps why they want to read this book, because it's a book I'm using to make my next video, which will be about Tolkien and mythology. So I guess my first question is, how do you go about writing a book like this? Do you use Tolkien's actual material itself, or do you use secondary sources to help fill in that information?
So what I did was I went and got a timeline of Tolkien. There's some free ones on the internet and people have put timelines down. I printed that out so there was just paper everywhere, the full time of Tolkien. And then there's people arguing about where this went and where that went. And then what I do is I start at the beginning, but I use audiobooks. So I will press play on the Silmarillion. And then as the Silmarillion's coming out, I will be typing up notes, typing everything up. And then obviously everything starts in red and I just go through it. Oh, this happened. He did this. This goes there. And then what I'll do is I went through the histories of Middle-earth. So I started all with Tolkien's work all the way. I also had to look out because there was a guy out there who, David Day, who was very famous with this Tolkien books, but apparently the absolute Tolkien lovers don't like him and say he got it wrong. So you got to avoid that sort of stuff. Well, then, of course, I went for the biography. So I'm just driving along and I've got a biography of Tolkien on. And I'm like to my girlfriend, note that down, darling. Note that down. You know, but she's half asleep. I've still got that. So you get a view of what he's like, what he's after, and then what it does. But what I'm trying to do, John, is I'm trying to, and I am not a Tolkien expert. We've spoke about this before. Basically, I'm trying to get complicated information and make it accessible for everyone. So you can pick up a book. You won't be an expert in it. I'm not an expert in it, but you'll suddenly be like, okay, now I get what's going on. I can go and read the difficult stuff. That's what we can do.
Okay. So let me try and ask you a few questions, see if you can answer them then, because I assumed you're more of an expert than I am. You must be, because you've recently read all these books. So what interests me about him is like his influences. So I know he was quite a strong Catholic, and the world wars were happening in his time. So how much did those aspects of his life influence his work? Can you see that through what you've written?
Well, so people have asked him, is his time in the war. Now, the problem is people say Tolkien was in the war and all that, and he was in the war. But when you actually read his biography, the biography about him, he basically was in hospital for a lot of it. He was in battles, but he ended up with trench fever. So he was a lot of the time in, doing his research. But people have said then, is it an allegory of one? Is famously saying he doesn't like this, he doesn't like allegory, he don't like that, and he's not. And he says if it was really based on war, there would be no winners, there'd be no goodies, it'd be bad, you know what I mean? So he said that didn't affect him so much. But many years ago, I went on a tour of the area where he lived, and there was two towers, bizarrely, were famous two towers. Like, so that must have come into it somewhere. And of course, the beginning in the Silmarillion, when you see, the world is sung into existence, it's clearly got some biblical, the one creator comes and there's the devil figure. And, it's without a doubt. But I would say minimum is that he definitely, Catholicism and the war are not that massive.
That's interesting. Okay.
Like he was with C.S. Lewis, who was clearly like, Christian. Is that. Yeah. And I'm sure some Tolkien scholars will say, yes, that, but he loved Germanic culture. He absolutely loved it. And he hated the French. He just didn't like the French. Apparently, he was at his meals. He got really annoyed if he was at, where he was at Oxford, Cambridge, he went around, but he got annoyed with French menus. It's like, this French, we've got bloody well good English here. So he was like, he seemed to have this idea of pre-1066 England. That's where you try to get to.
Okay, that's interesting. So in terms of his mythology, I mean, I know there's obvious Germanic and Norse influences in it. That's as clear as day. Yeah. But are there any other influences in there? Probably some Anglo-Saxon, but is all his mythology based around sort of northwestern Europe, or did he use Vedic culture or Arabian, Persian, or any other sort of stuff? Do you know?
As the I don't remember the name of it off by hand, but it's the Finnish epic. I think.
The Kalevala.
Yep, he's got some of that in it. But no, he generally does. He's famously quoted for saying, there is no mythology for England. We don't have one. So this is everything we're having. So he is saying,
Okay, that's interesting.
oh yeah, he was like, so the French came, and he says, obviously, and to be honest, he was a heavy Catholic. So even though Middle Eastern religion was over here, pulling in, he was like, we don't have anything really that's a solid idea of English. So what he did was he tried to get like the dark elves and the light elves were in there, tried to get the dwarfs and the giants and everything, and tried to mold them in that way. But it doesn't really fit. So you can tell he wrote The Hobbit, and it was for a different audience than he wrote The Lord of the Rings, and then totally different for The Silmarillion. And they just don't fit. Like, you've got, if you think Bilbo is clearly an 18th or 19th century Welsh Shire, Midlands person, and the hobbits are that, and they've got clocks and a museum, and they've got all these modern things actually in his world. And then you've got clearly sort of like Anglo-Saxon sort of idea over there. And you could say Gondor is almost night, so it doesn't actually fit when you put it together.
Yeah, they say about Gondor and Beowulf. There's some links there with I can't remember the guy's name. But yeah, you can do that. And I'll probably talk about that when I'll have probably to read Lord of the Rings again in the next week. Well, but I know there is some catch in there. And you see that about, some motifs in there, which I don't know if Tolkien was really aware of some of the motifs and what they really meant. He might have been, but I guess his work, I don't know if his work was before Dumézil. Check that out.
I don't know that. I do know that, what from that though, the fairies, he had a massive influence of fairies, bizarrely, because the elves came into it. But so just because that popped in my head when you speak about that is, they had the Victorian fairy, which is this small idea of a spirit but his fairies are tall. And actually, there's no descriptive difference between humans or elves. There's no pointy ears, there's no anything. It just says, you can see in their eyes that they are elves and they have a certain glow. But the idea is maybe he thinks that elves were once extremely magical back in this mythological past. But by the time it gets to Victorian times, they're small, their magic has diminished and they are nothing. And they have gone, and then they leave the world. So he's sort of giving this, this idea of elves have diminished into just legend.
That's interesting, yeah, because everybody consider fairies. I want to make a video of these as well, like these little cute winged things. But actually, fairies can be quite monstrous beings. Absolutely, quite happily pull your head off, and so for fun. So yeah, that's interesting. So okay, so the other thing I'm interested in is how he viewed the female role within his work, because there was some quite. There's strong female figure in there in the Galadriel and
women. This is the other a lot of people have a go at Tolkien for women. They say, "Oh, it's all men. It's all this." It's not. There's loads of powerful females in it. There's
absolutely, yes.
Beren and Luthien are the two. Like Beren's the human, and Luthien is this female elf, and she's the Rapunzel figure. They lock her in a tower. She has long hair, and she escapes by cutting her hair and making a magical cloak. And she goes off and does all these things. But she's like going to Sauron, the island of Wales, and just murdering him and just, like crushing